Red jacket. Yeah. And the ADs are sitting next to each other. That's scary.
I'm irresponsible in this meeting. He's responsible.
Ori says he's irresponsible in this meeting. Okay. We have arrived at 9:30 a.m. in Montreal. Welcome to the CBOR working group.
Can you speak closer to the mic?
Yes, I think I'm quite audible online, but I try to get the room to hear me better. So can you hear me way back there in the back of this enormous room? Okay, thanks. Welcome to the CBOR working group session at IETF 124. In case you're not aware, we are in Montreal and it is Friday. So welcome to the last day of the IETF. Let's get through our, why is this not advancing? Here we go. We have the wonderful new Note Well, which you should note well because that's what it's called. The bottom line is that by attending this meeting, you are agreeing to the participation rules of the IETF. This is a pointer to those rules. It does not exhaustively list them. Be sure you're aware of how you're supposed to behave and not, and what you're supposed to do with regards to IPR and all that other stuff that these policies outline. So everybody should be on Meet Echo, whether you're remote or in the room. I expect people to use the tool to get in the microphone queue so that we can queue up everybody fairly. And you should know this by now because it is Friday, the last day of the meeting. Simple agenda. We just covered the introduction and Note Well, etc. We're going to do a quick hackathon readout that if anybody has anything to say about the hackathon, and then we will get into the serialization issues that we will spend most of the time on, finishing up with discussions of PACT and EDN literals in the remaining time. Anybody want to adjust that agenda? Seeing no one. Two things I want to mention before we dig into the slides and discussions. Let me get my other screen up here so I can see the right thing. There was an errata just verified on NANS. So the bottom line is it just adds, make sure the sign bit's the same for NAN equivalents. Just wanted to let you know that that errata was verified today with the modifications that we discussed on the list. And Karsten asked me to mention the core href document, which is now in the RFC editor queue, that defines CRI scheme numbers for in the URI registry, and also registers a CBOR tag, the CPA 99 tag. So it's related to our working group in that way. Okay, Lawrence, should we start with your slides? Let me get those up.
So I was around for
Yeah, you have to be very close to the microphone.
let's see.
You might even want to pick up the microphone and hold it.
So can I make a very quick comment here? I wrote a message to the mailing list containing the responses to these slides. I don't want to stand here and recite all that. So if you want to follow along, please look into the mailing list. Thank you.
All right. So, my understanding from Paul was that we were going to kind of do a step back and think again a little bit about what we're trying to accomplish in the serialization and determinism in the working group. I made a list of I made a list of the issues here. I was around for 8949, so I'm criticizing my own lack of I don't know, participation or something there. So I don't mean to pick on anybody or anything. This is just a list. So, and it's not prioritized. It's just a basis for discussion. I do have one opinion that I wanted to state is that to me, CBOR is a sort of a cornerstone IETF standard. And I've been going at it trying to be a lot more thorough than a lot of the other documents, just like looking at the dusty corners, things like NANs and stuff like that, and doing a good job of that. I also see this as like this is our third go around at it. First was 7049, second was 8949. This is our third go around, so we should really be refining at this point. So I think most of you are really familiar with these issues, so I don't really want to go through them I don't want to describe them in detail here. I don't think that's necessary. We can have discussion on the individual ones if we want, but I just want to kind of have a list out there that we can kind of understand what we're looking at here. So so I'm going to go through them relatively quickly. So preferred serialization, the main issue with preferred serialization is the definite links are stated as a preference, not a requirement. I mean, that's something we missed, I think, for much of the work here. Another is what to do about the shortest length encoding of NANs. Extensive discussion on that. And then the unification of big numbers and integers. The document says to do that, but it's kind of hard. It's easy to miss it because it's not all of the requirements for preferred serialization are not in one place. Determinism, same lack of clarity from preferred serialization. Then to me, determinism is pretty clearly defined in section 4.2.1. That is the what's being referenced by lots of other drafts that need determinism. It should have listed the energy unification in its sort of list of requirements, and it did not. I think it's also useful to have some discussion about determinism at the application layer. ALDR did that, and my serialization draft has some different flavor of that. Big numbers. I mean, I wrote a pretty long comment maybe 6 months ago about section 3.4.3 and have done rewrites of it. So I think there's a lot of things that need to be clarified about it. And then, the same thing that the big number unification was not mentioned in the list of things for preferred serialization. Also, as we turned out recently, section 3.4.3 actually modifies the data model. Again, hard to notice, but an important thing. Information model, data model, and serialization. I think that's, I know that like 2-3 years ago, if I would have understood this, I would have been in way better shape and the discussion would have been like much easier. Instead, I had to get educated by the mailing list in a very tedious, awkward way for everybody. So then NaN equivalence is required by the basic data model. I mean, it's kind of there in a subtle way, but it doesn't say what the NaN equivalence is. That's actually the topic of that errata. And section 3.4.3 tweaks the data model, but again, it's hard to notice it because you're reading about the data model, and if you don't read section 3.4.3, you won't realize that. And then just it's not clear or explicit that each tag definition creates a new data model. Like the data model section is data models, plural, but it doesn't really explain. And then elsewhere it uses data model, so it's not clear there what that really understanding data models. And that again, that's I think other people on the list have come to understand what that is. And I mean, it's actually really great that CBOR is really clear about that and goes after that explicitly. And I think that's super useful. It makes CBOR great in some ways compared to competitors. So then duplicate detection. Then we had some recent discussions about section 5.6.1 about when, how duplicate detection is done. There's some subtle stuff in there where sometimes encoders can't actually prevent duplicates, so that the decoder needs to take care of that. It's a subtle odd use case for constrained environments, but it's there. So and then I think we could have some helpful hints for duplicate detection, like how that plays in with deterministic serialization, and how floats and maps as map keys, how they affect your implementation of duplicate detection. So I think that's my list. And one thing the last thing I'll just make an observation here is that many of these fit under the heading of, I mean, this was a list of issues with 8949 that I saw on the mailing list from the last couple of years. I don't think all of them are exactly determinism and serialization issues. For example, this one here is not really a determinism and serialization issue. So, I mean, my understanding is a question before the group from Paul is like, what documents do we author to address some of these things? So, okay, that's all I have to say. I guess so.
Okay, discussion?
Carsten Bormann. There is something implicit on these slides, I think, that we have to pull out, because that's really the essence of the discussion we have to have. I think Lawrence set out to do a new version, a revision of RFC 8949. That's not what the intention of the common deterministic encoding effort was. The intention of that was to have a separate document that takes the information that is in 8949 and presents it in a way that may be more useful for implementers and application data model designers. And
Karsten, could you please get closer to the mic? You are very faint.
yeah, I need to remember that in this room I have to do that. So the idea was to have a separate document that is partially an explainer document and partially a document that actually points to the places that are good practice to use in the document. So that was the idea. And when you say clarify something, it's not always clear whether you mean something is not properly described in 8949, like the sign bit thing that we just fixed today, or something is just written in a different place that you don't expect people to bother to read when they read the main part of the explanation. So I can go into the details of that for, yes. I think the important thing here is, how do we do this? I have one role model here, which is JWT. JWT is defined in RFC 7519. And a lot of things came up that implementers didn't do right when implementing this. So instead of doing a new revision of 7519, the working group decided to do a BCP 225, that points to all the stumbling stones that are in the way if you read 7519 and are not aware about certain security considerations. And that leaves 7519 available as the stable specification of JOTS, but it also provides exactly the clarification and the focus on a good way to use JWT that we are also trying to get here.
So I think the point that we're getting at here in this discussion today is the chair's read of the the working group discussion on the CDE document is that it was not clear what it said, how it said it, whatever, that all needed to be cleaned up. And the result of that discussion is or the result of that feeding into this discussion is we're looking for what should a document that covers that space say? What does the working group want to say in it, and how can it be clarified? Rowan.
Hi, Rowan May. So, Karsten, you've said a few times that CDE wasn't designed for this. That, you know, CDE was supposed to do this, or the intention was that. I don't think that that's really particularly relevant at this point. I think what's relevant is we need, you know, we've been going for 3 years on this document. We have a clear mandate to make something that implementers are going to understand. We can measure whether a particular section of a spec is clear enough by looking at what implementers do and the questions that implementers have. So the issues that Lawrence lists on these slides, those are all important. We've had lots and lots of mailing list discussion about them, and there have been lots of implementers who've been confused. So I think the first and most important thing is that we decide collectively what it is that we want implementers to do. And then if we don't say anything more about RFC 8949, or if we do BCP, or we do an errata, or we do an update, whatever it is, that this is too early to talk about that. We want to decide what it is that we want to come out of what are the recommendations or rules that we want from this working group, and then we can decide how we express that. And I think that we have a pretty clear consensus that what we were doing before was not working.
Yeah, Carsten again. So yes, exactly. We need to understand what we are trying to do. I believe that the discussion has kind of culminated in the military sense of that word. So we have gone through all the issues. We now understand the status of those issues, and we know what we want to do. So the next question is, how do we write it up? It's really hard to ascertain that we know what we want to do until we have written it up. So I have always tried to keep the CDE document up to date with the things that we found out and that kind of got attention at this point in time. It's not a very good document as a result of all these new observations and changes. So we have to sit back and fix it. But before we do that, we should reevaluate whether what we set out with, which was to have a BCP that goes alongside 8949, is a good way to handle this. And this is kind of orthogonal to how exactly NANs are encoded.
Beltram?
Yeah, Beltram. So ditto to what Rohan said. So what I can actually testify from the implementer's point of view is that the state of like the ecosystem is actually in shambles, as you described. So my opinion is that given the changes you are suggesting that are normative, like an informational RFC is probably not going to help implementers. Implementers are probably not going to pick it. And also, if those changes are normative, like don't use float or map keys, you have an internal problem now. So maybe what you're looking for here is more something like CBOR 2 rather than another RFC describing what should be done. And also last advice, but the only thing implementers actually understand is test vectors. So as long as you don't have test vectors will have someone claiming, okay, I have a library supporting CBOR, whatever version it is, that it won't be able to claim that unless all the tests in the test vector actually pass. So test vectors are like the lingua franca of all the implementation that should be out there. So yeah, go for that.
Yeah, I'd like to comment.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not particularly partial to it being a BCP or an update or something. I mean, whatever solution works for what we're trying to achieve is okay with me. The document that I authored is actually a standards track document. It's not an update. It defines two new serializations, ordinary serialization and deterministic serialization. Those like proper names. We can change the names, but just for now, these are both new serializations. So they're not actually, updating 8949. They are coincidental. They align very closely with 8949. And like, for example, deterministic serialization is only different from section 4.2.1 in the handling of NANs. That's the only difference in them. But so that was one way to deal with like what kind of document it is and how to orient it. So.
Carson?
And definitely +1 on the test vectors. Yeah, I mean,
So on
plus
the
10.
test vectors, the CDE document is actually quite good on that now. I have tried to steal everything that everyone ever wrote up on test vectors, and that's in the document, I think. Yeah, test vectors are important. I think that's one thing that got really front row attention here, and that's one thing we missed when we did the update to Internet Standard. The other question is, are we actually in need of two new serialization descriptions? And that, of course, relates to the question, why are we even writing these up? And the point of writing these up, I think, the two new serializations or the existing serializations that are written up in CD. So the point that I see for writing these up is that a document, and that's usually going to be some form of application-specific protocol specification, can simply point to whatever we come up with and have a very small menu of choices that are, and I have to use the word preferred, sorry about that. So these are the choices that we recommend that an application protocol designer does after he's done with the data model and then wants to write something about encoding constraints. Adding to this small choice is somewhat counterproductive because there are so many documents out there that actually just reference 8949 and could use some help from a document that more precisely describes what it means to reference 8949 on deterministic serialization. So for those who haven't been there, between 7049 and 8949, we changed what we consider to be the preferred deterministic serialization. So we got implementer feedback from people who implemented 7049. And they said the weird way in which you're ordering map keys is very confusing. So we came up with a change. And I really would like to hear what one wants to say. Go ahead.
I mean, just on that point,
Yeah.
You changed the ordering, not the preferred serialization, because
Yes.
preferred serialization wasn't defined.
Yeah, so
in
I'm sorry for
7049.
using the word preferred. So let's use the word recommended, even though this is really meant for BCPs. Yeah, well, that's part of the recommended serialization. In the wild, we currently have 3 choices, which are not saying anything, which means well-known CBOR is it. We have the old canonical serialization, which I will call legacy deterministic encoding. And we have what should be the recommended way of doing deterministic, which is what was written up under the name common deterministic encoding. And that's pretty much what 8949 says, but it does make some minor choices that some people will consider to be technical changes. And some people will say, well, if you are not totally mad, you understood it this way anyway. So that's of course a different thing we can do. And there is a 4th encoding constraint, which is interesting, which is the definite length only encoding constraint. And it took us a while to disentangle that from what's in 8949, because in some cases, to be able to use or write partial implementations, it's nice to do encoding constraints that are only oriented at making the life of implementers easier. And that's exactly what the definite length only constraint is about. Now, the deterministic constraints and the definite length constraints have in common that they influence both the sender of data, the producer of data, and the consumer of data. The producer of data is bound to only use certain choices that are available in the well-formed space. The consumer, once an application protocol references this encoding constraint as an interoperability constraint, can rely on the fact that it can break as much as it wants if somebody sends something that does not follow. Yes. So with those 4 choices now on the table, I would prefer if we could just limit ourselves to those choices. And that means specifically, there is no need to introduce an ordinary serialization. And there's not even a need to point to preferred serialization other than as a component of the deterministic serializations, because there's nothing useful you get in interoperability from that. I think that's really the litmus test here. We don't have to fill up the menu with items that you don't get, you're still hungry when you have eaten them. So these 4 choices, I think, should be what we do. And I think that's a very important decision. So definite length only is a part of the 2 deterministic methods. So it's kind of a Y. We have the well-known, we have the definite length only, and then we have the 2 different deterministic approaches. My hope was we could push the old one aside, but apparently we can't. And preferred serialization is an interesting recommendation to implementers. Do it this way, and people will be less surprised when they see these data. But it's not something that should be required for interoperability because it doesn't feed us anything. It doesn't give us any benefit.
Okay, Rowan.
Okay, Lawrence, would you mind going back a couple slides to the one with the lists of encodings? Okay, so I think the thing that I'm hearing from, if I'm to correctly understand Karsten, he said that personally, he doesn't think there's a need for general, for giving a name to do anything that's legal CBOR, which is general encoding in Lawrence's document. you don't have an objection to having to just saying, if you want to talk about any of the encoding options, you can having a name for it.
Yeah, I would still call it well-known CBOR because that's what it is. But you can call it any other way.
Well formed.
The fact that you just made a mistake saying that right now, I think tells us that we need a different term. I also heard you say that rather than have a sort of a combination, which we have as ordinary serialization in Lawrence's draft, rather than have a combination, that you would rather just define a sort of an encoding sort of separate on and off option that is turning off indefinite length or requiring only indefinite length. So I'll go ahead and give my opinion, and then I'll give like a short justification. So I think that having an easy, simple name for what Lawrence called general, I think that's useful. I think that having I have less of a strong opinion for whether we have ordinary encoding, which I quite like, or whether we just say, here's a toggle to turn on definite length only. But I will point out that that being able to say, I want to be able to do some, restrict things in other documents related to sort of map keys to prevent duplicates. I think that being able to say a way that we do this in this particular application of CBOR, it would be really, I think that it would be really useful for us to be able to refer to preferred encoding and to be able to refer to preferred encoding plus sort ordering. So you don't have to respond to this because I'm saying my opinion. I'm saying that there's some use in this.
I'd like
And-
to.
And after you're done, I'd like to hear if we can do some polls about some of these questions.
All right, so I'd like to speak here. I don't know if, who's read my document, but the point of ordinary serialization was basically to replace preferred serialization. And the point is that it's basically the same as preferred serialization, except the definite lengths are a requirement. And I think ordinary serialization should be and is easy to implement. It can be something that is widely put to use. The main purpose of ordinary serialization is to have interoperability without having to decode indefinite lengths, because decoding indefinite lengths is definitely difficult. I don't think we need a definite length only serialization distinct from preferred and distinct from ordinary, because I don't think the other parts of ordinary serialization are very difficult. And I've recently looked at the source code for a number of top CBOR libraries, and many of them do canonical, which is, and they do fine with it. So I don't see that there's any need to sort of fork serializations very much. I'm even on the line about the distinction between ordinary and deterministic. The only difference there is map sorting, and map sorting is expensive in some scenarios. So that's the only reason that those are separate. If it wasn't for the expensive map sorting, I would say we only have one kind of default serialization, one recommended serialization, and it would look like 4.2.1 of RC 8949.
Yeah, so I think that the one thing you said, which is really interesting, is that you talk about ordinary serialization mainly to get definite length only. And I think the best way to get definite length only is to have exactly that. The reason why I'm not so pumped up on ordinary serialization is that it comes as an interoperability constraint, which means you have to get all of it right before you can interoperate. Once you say the sender is going to do ordinary serialization, this is a promise to the recipient that the recipient doesn't have to implement anything but preferred serialization. And that is a promise we should not make because it fractalizes CBOR. We should continue with the expectation that a CBOR decoder can do well-formed CBOR. The difference between decoding preferred serialization and decoding general serialization is very small. It's just not worth to have another choice. Now, that, of course, is a matter of judgment. So I can imagine other people have other judgments. But I think it is pretty obvious that turning on ordinary serialization as an interoperability constraint without a good reason to do so just fractalizes things because all the bugs in existing implementations will be uncovered. So that's why I'm saying we should focus on definite length only, which is really hard to get wrong. I mean, either you use it or you don't use it. It's not. Every encoder should be easy to take a flag like this, and then we do one of the two deterministic encodings because well, there are applications that can benefit from them. There are applications that cannot benefit from them, but those that do benefit can choose it, and well, then they have the cost of actually making the interoperability constraint work. Now, on the other side, I just read an older RFC, I'm sorry, I have already forgotten which one it was, that actually explained why you want to have indefinite length encoding sometimes. And that, of course, should be a valid entry in the menu. And it's also the entry in the menu that most existing documents have already chosen. So we should not think you get away with much by ignoring general serialization. It's out there, and doing an implementation in the hope I will only ever find preferred serialization on the wire is another way to fractalize CBOR.
Yeah, I disagree with that. Having read a lot of source code recently, I think the hardest thing in preferred and ordinary is the indefinite lengths. The other stuff is widely implemented. I mean, you're talking about being able to decode shortest length argument. Everybody decodes any argument of any length. You're talking about shortest length float. Everybody is able to decode a float of any length, except some people don't do half. But I actually encountered implementations that could decode half but not encode half. So that was there. The other thing is the integer big int unification, and that kind of goes with if your environment supports big ints, you do them. If your environment doesn't, you probably don't. And if your environment supports big ints, it's really easy to do all the big int unification. It's like just a few lines of code. So I don't see that there is any infantilization going on here. And it seems like that the world is handling this stuff already just fine in their canonical implementations and stuff. So.
All right, we've built up a bit of a queue, so why don't we see what other people have to say about it? Joe.
Yeah, so I guess I'm confused by Karsten's suggestion that interoperability constraint is bad, but that having a DLO option is good. They seem similar to me. I think this comes back to the same place where we've had some discussion around whether a receiver needs to check that the encoder has encoded in a way that is commensurate with the whatever the protocol has mandated. So I'm an application layer protocol. I say you must not send indefinite length encoded items. Now the receiver Should they check to ensure that they didn't receive any of those or not? Is there some reason why the protocol has mandated this? And in some cases, there may be good reasons why that application layer protocol has just said that you must send definite length only, and I should reject anything that doesn't match that requirement. So there are some times where I'm going to have to check all of these things that have been sent. So if I'm having that restriction so that the implementation is easier and doesn't have to implement indefinite lengths, and I'll throw an error if I see one, then I don't understand like why. Like I'm not a generic CBOR decoder. I'm not trying to be a CBOR decoder there. I'm trying to be a decoder of that application layer protocol that happens to use CBOR. I haven't forked CBOR at all. I've just written implementation of that application layer protocol that's not generally useful in other ways. So that argument is not landing with me, I guess I'm saying. Whether you check or not, I think is up to the application layer to determine. Like, do they need you to check or not? Great. If not, then you don't perform that check. You can accept whatever generic CBOR you want. Again, it'd be nice to have a name for that. But if you don't need to check, don't check. But I think if you are going to check, there need to be rules for how you check.
Hey, Ron?
Hey, plus one to what Joe said, but basically I was going to say we have plenty of precedent for not having to check, where we have environments where we're trying to cause a migration over a very long period of time, and so a good reason why we should insist on reducing the number of choices is for security, is to avoid potential abuse. And there's a lot of potential abuse for indefinite length. So COT currently doesn't require definite length. There are some profiles of COT that do forbid indefinite length. But if, for example, we defined either this standalone option or ordinary encoding, we could say we could have a profile that says, all right, all of these COTs you must encode using ordinary encoding, and you still need to be able to receive things that are not, but it allows us to have a transition time. And that's a very common thing at IETF and a very important thing for us to be able to do. Chris.
Chris Lemons, COT that prohibits indefinite length array enthusiast. So I just want to say, in practice, I've built one of these COTs, and we found that indefinite length arrays were bad, and so we prohibited them in our profile. And we encountered all of the things that you said, and we wound up effectively coming to the conclusion that what we wanted was ordinary serialization, and we didn't have words to describe it. And so I love that we have words to describe it, and they're very specific and they're very easy to reference. And I want to encourage this. And I don't necessarily. We can argue about precisely which words and which labels we put on it, preferred versus ordinary and all of that jazz. But having those words is exceedingly valuable. And it mattered a lot to us that we needed the sorting of the arrays to not happen. That was a problem for us. And so having the difference between deterministic and ordinary is exceedingly valuable and is exceedingly useful. And I wanted to say that at the mic so that people heard that and heard that people that are actually implementing this and actually using this genuinely need words to describe this. And I appreciate it.
So don't sit down. So now we're getting to where I was really wanting the discussion to go. From what you said, you clearly have read Lawrence's
I have.
draft. do you think that is going in the direction you would like to see? And how close to that direction is it?
The definition currently in the latest version of draft for ordinary serialization is precisely and exactly what my specific. In fact, when we rev my specification for the common access token, we will be replacing all of that text with ordinary serialization, assuming that this document is published.
Thanks. Karsten?
So one comment, I think, Chris, my understanding is your implementation is a server-side super high volume implementation. I normally think of constrained environments as, microcontrollers, but you benefit from the constraints in a high volume environment.
Correct. Anything that you can do on a light bulb, you can do 1 billion times.
Yeah, Carsten, I think that was an interesting discussion that kind of supported my point. If we want to have a fifth choice on that menu, we can do that. I just would like to understand what the win is that you get from going beyond definite length only to ordinary serialization. Because you are restricting the encoder, but you may or may not be, I'm not quite sure how it is in your case, requiring, excuse me, that's exactly the point, allowing the decoder to reject input that is not structured this way.
Just go, yeah, don't worry about it.
The queue is complicated. Yeah, so we do not require that decoders enforce all of the rules of the serialization, but we permit them to. So as a practical matter, if you encode it poorly, then your tokens are probably not going to be interoperable, and that will punish you adequately.
So you are treating this as an interoperability constraint because you're essentially telling encoders, if you don't do this, you will get into trouble.
Face the microphone.
If you don't do this, you will get into trouble. Yeah.
That is correct.
Okay.
So
I
you asked
think we should do that, but that's maybe the small point of contention here.
So you asked the question, what do you get from preferred or from ordinary that you don't get from definite length only? You get basically similarity to preferred, basically the way most people have implemented preferred, and sort of alignment with canonical serialization, which is basically the same thing. So it's for most people, all they'll do is take their implementation and look at it and say, oh yeah, we already implement that and we're done. There's no, it's not really a new thing. And then if you want to look at the actual benefits, you get less bytes on the wire. You get you also get a basis for deterministic. The difference between ordinary and deterministic is only one thing, sorting. So there's a nice stack there and a nice factoring of your software. We're definite length only, then, well, then now we've got preferred over there and definite length only here, and that kind of, it seems like a much more complicated stack and set of options to describe.
Yeah, Carsten Norman again. We need to think in terms of interoperability.
We have been thinking in terms of interoperability.
Yes.
Everybody in this room is only thinking in terms of interoperability.
I wish so.
Rowan agrees with that last statement and says that's what everybody in this room is thinking.
Yes. So when you think about interoperability, then you have two parties that need to be influenced. It's the producer and the consumer. What the consumer does, of course, influences the producer as well. So when you say, by using preferred serialization, you get shorter data on the wire, that is certainly true. And it's a quality of implementation observation about the producer. But it's not about interoperability. what you are trying to say about ordinary serialization is that you would like to enable consumers to make these constraints. So you essentially require producers to make these constraints as well. And your interoperability now hinges on something that you actually don't need.
Chris?
You made the point I was going to make in your second sentence there. It turns into an interoperability concern because anything the producer is allowed to produce, every consumer must be able to consume. And that is an interoperability concern. And so, yes, we may have chosen what we chose because it's fewer bytes on the wire, because we think it's the best way of doing it. But it's an interoperability concern because we're forcing every single consumer to consume all of the things that the producer can produce.
Rowan?
Hi, Rowan. So I think of having an ordinary serialization as a stepping stone to deterministic serialization. So if you want there to be more deterministic serialization in the world, then I think that it would be very useful for us to define ordinary as opposed to just having indefinite length restrictions. And
Christian?
Kirsten, I'm just not as a chair, but as an individual. Carsten, I do understand that there is an unneeded requirement if we make this like a stack rather than a diamond. But is there any harm in doing it? Because my experience from the few situations in which I wanted to produce, say, a 32-bit integer because like my device is producing bytes that just like to happen to be CBOR, is that this only happens in situations when I'm on such a constrained device that they are talking to a big node only anyway. And I have not found myself or implementations I've worked with in a situation where they must necessarily produce definite length, but also the producers need to be able to produce non-preferred serialization.
So one example that came up in the discussion was a situation where the consumer was able to get data with 16-bit floating point in it, but the producer was not able to produce that. And that is a situation where most protocols actually feel fine. They can just use general serialization and are done. But if I switch on ordinary serialization, then suddenly the producer needs to implement sending of half-length floating points. Now, this is not a lot. Pardon me? Yeah, don't switch on ordinary serialization.
Rowan, microphone.
Yeah, so what I'm trying to say is that people will switch on this thing without considering that there may be some partial implementations out there. And this is all about supporting partial implementations. One point that I also would like to make, most of the constraints that you really are making are data model constraints. They are not encoding constraints. And I think it's really important to separate these two things in your mind. Mm-hmm. So if you don't want not a number of values, you just say that in your data model. That's not something you have to tell your encoder. Of course, you can tell it. It's nice redundancy check. But the important thing is that we are not providing an extremely complicated profile bit set that people. I grew up in the time of PIX pro forma statements, where you had this form that you had to fill in which parts of which protocol your protocol actually was using. And CBOR is not designed that way. CBOR is designed like JSON, where you're not discussing ahead of time what kind of JSON you have, where you probably need to know whether it's the original JSON or internet JSON, but we all assume it's internet JSON these days, so we are not saying that, even though we should. So please keep data model issues at the data model and really focus on the encoding constraint. And the half-length floating point is a very nice demonstration of the difference between general and ordinary.
I grew up in the era of punch cards, so put it in perspective. Chris.
Yeah, so I want to make sure that there's not too much being read into my enthusiasm for ordinary serialization, and that is that floating points are a mess, and you shouldn't put them in your standards, and so we didn't. So yeah, I do agree that we need to be real specific in here, but my support speaks not at all to floating points, because every time we tried to put floating points in, it just made a royal mess of the standard, and nobody could get it right. So just don't use them.
Okay. Rowan May. So I think that we have people who know what they're doing, who want to use ordinary serialization, who want to use deterministic serialization, maybe even who want to do, preferred serialization. I don't know. I don't know of anybody who's just wants to do that. But I feel like Karsten has reacted when, for example, Anders is on the list and says that he wants to, he's like, why doesn't everybody just do it this way? My way works great. And he's right. His way works great. But sometimes you can't do it his way. And I feel, my observation is that you're trying to discourage us using exactly the kind of moral arguments that Anders is using. So please stop, and please let us have the things on the menu that we want to eat.
So, preferred serialization and canonical have been around for a really long time, and I don't think anybody has complained too much about them being too difficult to implement. So I don't see, that's another reason why I don't see the need for a definite length only, is we've lived with preferred serialization for a really long time. And the parts of it, except everything was relatively clear about preferred, except for the definite length only. And we've lived with it. It's not like we're having raging discussions about these other parts of preferred serialization, except for the nans, but yeah.
Yeah, so I think that statement is a nice expression of the somewhat limited view we have in this working group. Of course, you want to be able to use floating point JSON documents, do that all the time. And one invariant of CBOR is that you can do everything that JSON can do, well, modulo the Unicode violations. So I think that's really an interesting position that I think was entirely untenable, that you make requirements on a recipient that you don't need to do, but you do it anyway. So if that is what we want to do, then we just add ordinary serialization to the menu. I don't think any of the other versions encoding constraints on the menu need to go away because of that. So for instance, the document that was just approved yesterday uses definite length only as an encoding constraint, because that makes sense. I just want to continue to talk about the interoperability result of doing that, which is that suddenly the sender and the receiver need to agree on every detail of preferred serialization. And well, the fact that most of the things you have in mind actually doesn't belong to encoding anyway, but it's a data model issue that certainly we need to address at some point. So right now it's pretty hard to write CDDL to stick within finite numbers, and we definitely need to fix that in CDDL.
Okay, we have a Chris and then Joe, and then I've locked the queue because we need to wrap this up. Go ahead.
Briefly, I think that we may be over-indexing on the degree to which we expect the receiver in all circumstances to enforce the rules that we enforce on the issuer. Because not every data model, not every profile use of CBOR is going to require that. And I think there are a lot of places where we want to tell the serializer, you're not allowed to do these things, so that some people don't have to implement them. But if people implement them, they aren't necessarily required to enforce them in every protocol that uses CBOR. So I think that there's a lot of different profiling here on the menu, and that is driving a lot of this. We want to have clearly defined words and therefore clearly defined libraries so that specific use cases can do specific things.
Okay. I just saw emphasis in the room to that last statement about clearly defined words and clearly defined libraries. Joe.
So I was basically going to say exactly what Chris just said. If an application layer protocol wants to have these interoperability constraints, it would be nice from a generic CBOR library developer's perspective to have a predefined set of choices that they can make so that I can implement it once and that I can be, my library can then be used in a variety of different ways as application developers want. If they want to check, great. If they don't want to check, great. If they want to produce or not produce, great. And I can have options for all those things. There's a finite set of choices. And I am for that. And I don't understand why we would, over a clearly articulated and technically useful, interesting argument around why you would want to limit these kinds of things, like why we would tell people no, we don't want a word for that. We've got a definition for ordinary that'll work. It's useful. There's demonstrated use and need for it in the community, and from a library perspective, I think it's useful too. So can we just stop arguing about this and write a document, please?
Well, that's thank you, Joe. That's where we were just about to start heading. I'm gonna do a show of hands. Unfortunately, I don't like the show of hands tool because it doesn't give me enough options, but let's see what we can do. The show of hands I'm gonna do is Lawrence's draft going in the, wait, I gotta look at the text I wrote, going in the direction we want a serialization draft to go. Spell that correctly. Okay. So there is the poll. You have a choice of yes, no, or no opinion. And I will cue the Jeopardy music while we wait a little bit for this. Oh, somebody's whistling it nicely. Okay. Okay, so we appear to be roughly evenly split between yes and no opinion. I can guess who the no is, but if you're one of the no opinions and you wouldn't mind saying what do you need to develop an opinion, or how would you reword this question to make it more useful to you? Somebody who said no opinion want to take a stab at that? Try to help me out. Yeah, so does anyone want to suggest a question that might be useful to be asked right now? Rowan, you look like you are thrashing about.
What about if we just restrict, what if we just say, would people be okay with the choices on the menu? Like, let's leave the nans aside, the choices on the menu that are currently in Lawrence's draft.
Okay. Are
So
you okay with choices
That defining general, ordinary, and deterministic.
of general, ordinary, deterministic. Okay, so are you okay with the choices of general, ordinary, and deterministic? Let's give that a shot and see where we are. Well, now we don't appear to be getting no opinions, so that's interesting. Couple of no opinion, but it's not divided in the same way that it was. So that's
Yeah,
interesting.
well, this question works for people who have not read the draft and would thus just abstain before.
It's a good point. Yeah. Okay, I think we're getting some sense of direction here, something we can continue on the list. Let's call this topic wrapped for the meeting, but we're going to continue this discussion on the list, obviously. It seems to me that we have a clear direction that this way of modeling is not the right word. This way of framing it is at least going in the direction that's useful to the majority of participants. So let's see if we can come to something that really is consensus here. Rowan, the last word before we move on.
This was unrelated to this encoding, but it was about, do we want to talk about one of the other issues like NANs or duplicate maps?
I don't think I want to go into the NANs now in this meeting. We can continue that on the list. I think we've been reasonably productive about discussing that on the list. Karsten, you also had your hand up. You want to say a word or two before we go on?
Yeah, I just want to remind people that we just approved a draft yesterday that uses another choice that is not on Lawrence's menu. So I think documents will continue to do that. And also, I think it's important to keep in mind.
The documents will do that. Would you consider that to be sort of an offshoot of general in some way?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
that's what it is.
Yeah.
Well, everything is an offshoot of general.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. So the other observation is that the documents that make this choice may not be the documents that define the data model. So the encoding decision is made at the time when you turn your data into a media type representation or embedded CBOR. And read the core working group href document if you don't understand why that makes a difference.
Okay. So we have Laurent has his hand up. After that, Karsten, I'll ask you to start to take your slides and go through the packed and well, mostly EDN literals is the one I want to focus on if we can do that. So,
okay.
Laurent.
Yes, I'm sorry, I was just discovering this this document, but for the chic representation in core conf, we have also the same problem. For example, we have an empty array and we have null. So if we want to make a hash of this representation to be sure that we have the same information, then we need to have a very strict representation of the information. So that could be interesting.
Thank you. All right. So let me bring up Karsten's slides. Share slides. All the slots for requested media. Oh, right. I have to get the slide clicker off. There has to be a better way to do that.
Yes.
Karsten's slides.
So
and let's move you to, so? Yeah, that's where I'm headed. So there's.
Go one forward to the end literals, 25. No, that's 1 to 4.
go. EDN literals. And let me give you the clicker.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that the document that we really need to finish here is the EDN literal document. There are a few small issues that we still need to understand. But other documents are waiting there. So for instance, for this draft I talked about, the IETF core href, we had to move the definition of the EDN literal for this draft. It's now in the EDN literals document because the core href document doesn't want a normative reference to a draft that is still in waiting. Yeah, so we had an interesting discussion point. The last time we had a technical discussion about this at some interim meeting, I forget which one it was. And the idea was to avoid the escaping hell that you can get into with a JSON style escaping mechanisms by supporting raw strings. And both Joe and I have implemented them and think they are the best thing since sliced bread. Well, that's just speaking for me, excuse me. We need to understand the remaining details. So Joe and I started having one-on-one calls. One of those calls has happened. There are some action items from this call that still needs to be done. The IETF intervened, but I think we have a good way forward on the EDN literal side. So once Joe and I have converged, I think it will be much easier to get any remaining different ideas addressed. So that's really all I want to say, because those slides that are in sepia here, those are interim slides that have aged over the time. We should have discussed them in 123, but didn't get to it. So this is what raw strings are. I don't know whether I really need to go into detail here because I did in the interim.
Okay, the question I'm going to ask all of you is, does anybody think I think we're getting close on EDN literals and that we ought to wrap this up pretty soon. Does anyone think otherwise who would like to get in the queue and say something? Joe?
Yeah, I think we're really close. I think Karsten and I have one outstanding sticking point where we haven't agreed yet, but we're working toward it. And this is a place where I think he and I are the only ones that feel really strongly about it. And so we're trying to work through it to the point where if we can come to some kind of consensus, I think we can talk the rest of the folks into it. So I'm taking that as an action item for myself and prioritizing it accordingly.
Great, thanks so much.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone else want to say anything about EDN literals? Christian?
On feeling strongly, I used to have pretty strong opinions there, but I'm fine with both possible outcomes of this. So thanks for getting this forward.
It sounds like your cat agrees as well.
Indeed, she does.
Okay. So I think nothing else on EDN literals. Shall we just switch over to
from
Pat?
a planning perspective, I don't know how long Joe and I will need, but it would be good to have an interim where we can discuss the results before Christmas.
Okay. But I gather we're not talking about months. We're talking about a relatively short time.
Before Christmas is not months. No worries.
Yeah,
excellent.
This Christmas.
2025. I would also point out that there is a possibility that Karsten and I won't be able to come to some sort of agreement, and we'll need to have some tie breaking or some help with other ideas that we haven't come up with. Give us a couple of weeks to at least see if we can work through this before we resort to that. But it is possible we're going to need some help.
Okay, so your target is before the U.S. National budget is resolved.
No fair guessing something it might be.
Okay, shall we go over to PAC then?
Yeah. So PACT is a document that has been around quite a while and has been pretty stable for a long time. We have had some recent implementation feedback. That was really why after the first working group last call, we said, let's not just ship that now, but make sure we have implementations that check that. So this is mostly what has changed. There also were comments about high tag consumption. And in particular, Joe pointed out that consuming a lot of tags makes one way to implement tags harder, because if you stick all your tags into a hash table and you need 10,000 of them, that's getting unwieldy quickly. So we looked at those tunables, we called them A, B, and C, and looked at examples and arrived that A equals 12, B equals 8, and C equals 8 gives us a reasonable compactness and well, minimal amount of disturbance of those hash tables. So that's the first item on the list. The third item on the list is error messages. We fall into the map key trap again. And you cannot have just one single error message, because then you can't have it twice in a map. And that's why we changed this from 1112 of undefined to 1112 of any. And finally, we looked more closely at the table setup invariants. So this draft is essentially defining the decompression. Other documents are going to define the compression, and they do table setup definitions. And we want to set some guide rails for that table setup. And this also includes some security considerations that are part of the guide rails. So this is what was addressed. And I think the people who have been implementing this are already quite happy with this -17. We still have dissent in the working group. And my idea is that we should try to do something very similar to what we were doing in Ideate Literal, but among the people who are interested in PACT. So I forgot to say, PACT really is a set of tags. It's not likely to be used by the majority of CBOR protocols. Like the majority of CBOR protocols don't use time tag or array tags. This is just some general infrastructure that is available for an application designer to use, so they don't have to reinvent all the elements of this mechanism. So those people who are interested in applications that might make use of this, they should do these high bandwidth web calls. And my proposal would be to set up some calls, not doing an interim as an official thing, but just an official discussion and see how far we get there.
Good.
And that's all I have.
Okay. Any comments? Any questions? Okay. Thanks, Karsten. Let me get rid of the slide clicker so I don't goof that up again. So the other thing I wanted to mention is the interim calls, which we have a plan to start them, well, to have one on December 10th. I will request that. Whether we actually have it or not depends whether we have an agenda for it. And then we start really again on January 7th, because the next one would have been December 24th, and that's likely to be an unpopular date to have these things. Well, nothing in particular. Anything that we have to follow up from this meeting would be on December 10th. So we'll see what collects on the list for that. That's almost a month out, so we have a few weeks to sort out what we want to talk about on the 10th. So I think I'm done. Does anybody have any last words for this session? We have an AD in a red hoodie.
That doesn't
coming
mean
up here.
anything. No, I am the AD for this group. I just want to thank the chairs for a well-run session, and I appreciate all the work you're putting into this, and I appreciate all the work everyone in the group is putting into this. This was I felt this was a great meeting. Actually, there were a lot of in-depth topics we were discussing, and to be frank, I'd appreciate it if other work groups were like this. So so thanks everyone. I appreciate all the
So
good work.
all y'all pat yourselves on the back. And yeah, I just wanted to call out our new co-chair, Paul Hoffman, who is unfortunately stuck in Deleg this morning, which we couldn't disambiguate. It's not the right word. We could not deconflict that at the last minute. So, but next time we will make sure that Paul is set up as must be here. And thanks, Christian, for doing your stuff from Europe. We will likely meet in Shenzhen. I know there will be people who won't be there. I hope we can get most of you there. It should. I'm really a fan of the town. And then we go back to Europe after that in Vienna. So we'll see you all. I hope the Mr. Trump's flight plans have not interfered with yours, and that you all get home safely. Rowan, last word.
I was just curious about who here is planning to go.
Right.
has
Let's
plans
ask
to go to
that.
China.
Yeah. Let's put it this way. Who expects to be in Shenzhen? Just hold your hand up in the room or raise your hand in the tool. Okay, we got most people in the room are saying yes. I'm not seeing any pop-ups in the tool. All right. So, we should have a decent meeting in Shenzhen, and we'll make sure we get some dumplings for it. So. All right. Thank you, everybody. Travel well.
Thank you. Have a good day.
I love China, but having worked for two companies in China, I'm hoping Chinese dissidents are probably going to sit this one out.
So
I'll be